Hello lovely listeners, welcome to the Mauve Coaching Podcast, where we talk all things health and fitness, emotional and mental health, career chats, travelling, just life in general to be honest, the good, the bad, the ugly and absolutely everything in between. This podcast serves as a safe space for myself, for the lovely guests that I'll have on here and for you guys listening to be raw and real, to be open, vulnerable and transparent. Absolutely no filter. With that in mind, let's get stuck in. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Mauve Coaching Podcast. Today we'll be talking all things training based on a Q&A that I popped up in my story this week. So before we even get stuck into the Q&A segment, I just want to start by saying that I was actually really almost taken aback by some of the questions posed to me. Not because they were overly stimulating or, striking or outrageous, right? They were all pretty run-of-the-mill questions with some underlying hints that the effect of toxic diet culture from, when we were growing up, especially for the likes of millennials and Gen Zers, it still is forever ingrained in our brains. And that there is still some work to do on changing that narrative and rewiring a lot of people's perceptions and thoughts towards health and fitness through the lens of a female. So from the perspective of a woman when it comes to losing weight or gaining muscle, the motivations behind that in the first place and how to go about it. It was just really interesting to see based on the questions, not so overtly, not very directly apparent, but when I was really reflecting on how people asked certain things and phrased them, I was like, whoa, this is clearly something that we need to talk on. In this sense, because the questions asked to me, it was no, there's actually so many limiting beliefs that need to be addressed and rewired going forward. So this will actually be a really exciting podcast to record, and it's something I'm super passionate about. Obviously, being a PT, a large part of what I do is within the realm of training. So let's get stuck in. So the structure of this podcast will be based on those questions that posed to me. However, because of the nature of them, like I said to begin with, being quite interesting and maybe potentially controversial or based on people's unique perceptions that were based and rooted in, limiting beliefs or the prevalent beliefs of society from when we were growing up and we haven't been able to shake them, I thought the best way to approach this would be kind of looking at it through the lens of myth busting or backing. So I'm either going to bust or back the myth. So myth bust number one. This one wasn't overly shocking to me because it's something that a lot of clients come to me when they are hoping to gain some muscle, because a lot of the clients that come to me are coming to me with that intention to get help to gain some healthy weight. Okay, so that's through both muscle primarily and a little bit of healthy body fat in a lot of cases. And because a lot of the time these girls come to me with lingering disordered eating behaviors, okay, because of the likes of toxic diet culture and the long-term impact that has had on our brains, because when we're younger, we're growing up, our brains and our thought process, our cognitive thought process are they're like a sponge, right? We soak in absolutely everything we hear, we see, and that doesn't just go when the trend changes, okay? And it can be super frustrating for girls, especially, like I said, the ones that come to me that are wanting to gain weight, and their biggest roadblock a lot of the time is their inability to eat enough of the right foods, and, we have to work on healing the relationship with food there. But what I find so interesting is that even the ladies that do come to me that want to, gain some healthy weight, be that through primarily lean muscle mass or a little bit of healthy body fat, a lot of the time they still have this preconception that weight training equates to being bulky. I'm going to straight up bust that, because from the get-go, there's no umming and ahhing about it, because that is straight up just not factually correct. Because first things first, it takes time to build muscle. It takes around 8 weeks if you're new to training to get the muscle fibers even growing. And that's all contingent on the likes of good nutrition and consistent training. Okay, so before you even worry about the idea that weight training can make you bulky, let's just address the fact that muscle building is hard, okay? It is slow and then very fast to begin with when you're new to training. As I said, it is contingent on having good nutrition and consistent training program in place. And this concept of newbie gains is based on the logarithmic growth curve, okay? So when you start training, the pattern of growth is logarithmic, okay? So when you start, especially when you're brand new to the gym and your muscles have never been exposed to this sort of stimulus before, your ability to gain muscle and capacity to do so is quite large compared to maybe the likes of me, been training for 10 years. And while that has been a non-linear journey, like I talked about on my Instagram recently, still, my muscles are used to a certain extent the exposure to weight training, what that's like, and I have to really work hard to progressively overload week on week and support that with good nutrition to grow. And in saying that, I do have a maximum capacity or capability of gaining muscle unless I were to bring the likes of other substances into place, which I never plan on ever doing. I'm going to reach my maximum potential eventually, okay? And I mightn't even ever do that because it is quite hard to sustain and maintain muscle for prolonged periods of time, especially as you get older. That's another topic for another day. However, regardless of that, when you start training, like I said, if you're a newbie, right? Your first year, the potential for growth is quite large, okay? So you are able, if you're on a good training and nutrition program, to potentially build and grow almost half of your muscle building capability. That is then cut in half the year following, the year following, the year following. It just works that way. It's a logarithmic growth potential curve. And this is because when you start weight training, your muscles are super sensitive to this new stimulus and have incredible growth potential. And without getting too technical, the muscle fibers are still quite small, making it quite easy for the nuclei to grow and expand. And after that, so as I said, the rate of growth potential kind of cuts in half year on year after the first year. And from that point onwards, it will be near impossible for you to gain muscle and lose body fat or reduce body fat because of that very reason, okay? Because you will reach your maximum capacity or near maximum capacity eventually. So inevitably, the gains that will be made will be less muscle gains and more so body fat, okay? But that is what the journey of muscle building from being a newbie to advanced looks like. So yes, at the beginning, your muscle growth potential is huge, okay? But let's just acknowledge that's all relative to you. I'd love to even challenge that word bulky because I think a lot of the time that actually has to do with like even height and weight distribution. And I think that in itself is even a subtopic within this realm, is that when you are on the shorter side, far more likely to, I guess, show off the gains, be that through body fat or muscle gains, when you're on the shorter side, as opposed to the taller gals who actually struggle to put on or at least show the muscle growth or the body fat, right? It's easier to get away with having a little bit of a higher body fat percentage if that is something that you value. But it's simultaneously also harder for you to show and for your muscles to appear larger because of that height weight distribution. So shout out to my petite gal pals because you guys are in a pretty good position to make some pretty insane physique gains just because of the fact that your height weight distribution will help you show off the gains even more. And probably most importantly, to bust this myth, the role of nutrition cannot be understated here, okay? Because this topic or this podcast is primarily talking about training, okay? But it's really hard to talk about training without looking at the likes of nutrition, which we'll be doing a different podcast on, so I won't talk too in depth on it. Because if you're training like a bodybuilder, okay, like you're on this epic training program and it's perfectly designed, you're showing up every week, albeit probably with suboptimal energy levels, because if you're not supporting that with the appropriate diet to build muscle, it's not going to happen, okay? Like, what happens is, if you don't know this on a granular level when it comes to how muscle grows and how you build muscle, when you are training the gym, okay, when it comes to weightlifting, and we're talking about the microscopic tears in our muscles, okay, because that's what happens when you are training, say, to failure, or you're progressively overloading week on week, be that through increasing the reps, increasing the load, slowing down the tempo, improving the range of motion, whatever it may be. The microscopic tears that comes from pushing your body outside of its comfort zone, okay? Because what happens is our muscles adapt to the stimuli, especially, as I said before, the longer you train, the harder you have to work to kind of get the muscles to adapt and to grow. If you're not then fueling or healing those tears with the adequate nutrition, so protein, carbs particularly, as well as fats, you're not going to grow muscles. So in what world can you get bulky? And as I said before, that word have issues with, because I don't like it for many reasons. As I said, what is your definition of bulky? And even then, our ability to get bulky, if you can't see, if you're not watching, inverted commas are being thrown around the gaff here. We also have far lower testosterone levels to that of men, which makes our ability to even build, like our muscle building capacity, is far lower than men to begin with. So in no shape or form, unless we hop on the feckin' steroids, which we're not going to do because we're all about health and fitness here, aren't we? Rest and be at ease with the fact that it's literally biologically impossible for you to get bulky, even if you disregard absolutely everything else that I said there. Just take into account the testosterone levels, differences between men and women, and also the role of nutrition. A lot of you gals, I know for a fact, because of every single client that's come to me, no joke, every single client, under eating. So in what world can you grow muscle and gain some body fat while you're doing so? Can you achieve a bulky aesthetic because you're not fueling the muscle growth to begin with? And finally, before we put that myth to the side and to never talk about the idea that weight training makes you bulky ever again, because let's just leave that in history, in the past. I'm done with it. I'm over it. It's not true. It is possible to incorporate weight training into your lifestyle, into your programming, and be in a slight caloric deficit and achieve simultaneous some muscle growth as well as a slight reduction in body fat percentage. It's quite a fine art to achieve, but what you can do in this particular instance, albeit with what I would recommend the guidance of a coach, is if you're in a slight caloric deficit and you are on a good training program, what your body can do, while it doesn't work for everyone, just to preface that, your body can pull from its fat stores to fuel itself and potentially build muscle mass. However, prioritizing foods rich in protein is super key here, obviously, to help support muscle building, but also to kind of improve like satiety, satisfaction levels. You know, you'll be in a slight caloric deficit. So in terms of that, it also helps with feelings of fullness. However, it is, as I said before, a really fine art. So I don't really recommend you kind of just going off on a limb and trying to figure that out on your own, purely because it's so important to have that guidance and support, because small tweaks in your nutritional intake and your training can have massive impact. I'm personally, like I spoke about before, at least on my Instagram, kind of going through a bulking phase. So when I say bulk, what I mean by that is I'm in a caloric surplus. I'm training like a freaking boss in the gym, I'm not gonna lie. And together, what I'm hoping to achieve and have been achieving is building muscle mass while also putting on a little bit of body fat, purely because the fact that A, like I said before, the longer you are in the game, the harder it is for you to gain muscle without gaining a little bit of body fat. And B, I was sick for 2 weeks, so my metabolism was absolutely destroyed by having a gastro disorder and not being able to eat, and then me quickly resuming the bulk like nothing happened. So obviously my body was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. However, especially if you are like an intermediate, kind of going through like a caloric surplus phase and, you know, an improvement phase, like a muscle building phase, and then going into a slight caloric deficit after for say 6 to 8 weeks, or even longer if you want to, you know, stagger it a little bit longer to make it a little bit more sustainable and healthier, that can be the approach that you guys take. But as I said, it is something that I would only ever really advise doing with the help of a coach who is equipped with the knowledge, resources and tools to help you do that in a healthy, sustainable manner. Myth bust number 2. Men and women should train the same. I'm not going to come out and say bust her back, because this one's complex. So there's 2 parts to it. First, I'm going to say back to a certain extent. Okay, so from a training standpoint, so from how you are to approach, say, the likes of progressive overload, that should be the same as men. Okay, and this has always irked me because I've never personally had this opinion on it, maybe because I educated myself on it from, you know, a young age, from when I first started training, and I didn't really let the gimmicky Instagram narratives permeate my mind all too much. It did in certain ways. I'm not going to try and say I got off scot-free from that stuff. Obviously, as I've talked about before, was very much heavily influenced by the likes of like the thigh gap trend, all those things. But when it came to like, you know, the workout reels on Instagram, which I would have seen growing up, what I never used to kind of wrap my head around was why it was being plugged. Women should train high rep, low load, like low weight, and men should train heavy and low rep. Like, why is, in what world does that make sense? Like, because if you look at it from a progressive overload standpoint, either way, both are variables that you manipulate to progressively overload, to gain muscle mass, to create the small microscopic tears like I've spoken about in the muscles that are then to be healed and grow in size when you support it with adequate nutrition. One of the biggest misconceptions in the health and fitness industry for the likes of females is that it's almost the narrative that we are meant to be training high rep, low weight. This is apparently with the intention to tone up. And I think I've spoken about this before. I'm not a fan of that word, toning up, again, because what the fuck does that mean? Like, if you want to say increase your lean muscle mass, say that. Toning up, like, it's how a lot of like the booty programs and like all those like gimmicky programs that are made by people who aren't qualified in the industry, they just have really blessed genetics, sell their programs. It's like a toning up program, 8-week program. Like, it's just not, firstly, like, that's like morally wrong for so many reasons, but it's also just like completely factually incorrect, because the way these programs are often built is like 15 to 20 reps for like, you know, 6 kg, and just keep doing that and you'll keep toning up and you'll never get bulky. It's like, well, yeah, you'll never get bulky because you won't be progressively overloading and you won't be gaining any muscle mass. You'll just be sticking and maintaining whatever you do have currently. So you're literally just wasting your time and energy and effort levels by going to the gym 3 to 4 to 5 times a week just to be not achieving anything. And this is because of the narrative plugged by, as I said, like society. I'm not even sure where it started from, that in order to avoid being bulky, we have to approach it through this high rep toning perspective. And it's like, no. And no, men and women alike should train the same, in the sense that we should be both striving to increase load week on week. Obviously that will vary based on the muscle group in question, but week on week, it shouldn't be just about like sticking to the same reps, about progressively overload, no matter if you're man or woman. We should be both striving for proper form, heavier loads. And like I said, women will not, both to our detriment and I guess depending on your perspective, to our fortune, be able to build muscle to the extent that men can. And that's a mother effing frustration of mine, and I don't like it. I don't like it. It's annoying, but it's the case. But the detriment side of things, I guess, would be that we find it a little bit harder to shed that extra bit of body fat when that is the intention. Then the second part of this myth that I actually want to bust, I wish I had like a buzzer. I'm going to bust this part. The narrative from a research standpoint, so how things have been structured in research papers and like what they've been studying in general, up until recently, have been heavily focused on health and fitness through the lens of a man, okay? Not for women, not through a female health lens, not how do we support our unique hormonal profile, which is so freaking different to a man, in our training program. Even leaving aside nutrition, as I said, it's not a part of this particular podcast, even just from a training standpoint. And this is something I spoke about on my Instagram recently, is that what they've found is that based on our particular hormonal profiles during our menstrual cycles, there's meant to be a typical menstrual cycle, but it's very, very rare that anyone falls within that category. Like I've said before, we all have unique sets of things that we're working through, be it through healing our relationship with food and disorderly eating that might have an impact on our menstrual cycle length, underlying health conditions. There's so many reasons that a typical menstrual cycle isn't all that typical, okay? But even focusing studies on female health and training to support our unique hormonal profiles wasn't a thing really up until recently. And it just baffles me, because why the fuck wasn't it? And I think it is primarily through what these companies were being funded to research, because male competitive sport, for example, so it would have been primarily through athletic performance that these studies are being based on. Dominant gender of that industry was men for a long time. The most important thing is that it's being researched now and there's studies coming out on it. And what I find really interesting is the concept of cycling your training, okay? So based on different parts of your cycle or phases of your cycle, you can train in certain ways that support your physical, mental, and emotional well-being, okay? Because even putting aside like physical changes as a result of these hormonal fluctuations aside, temporarily, we can come back to that. Your headspace is going to be different when you are in your late luteal phase, when you're in your menstruation phase. So the former is usually when you experience, if you have potential hormonal issues, you might experience some PMS symptoms, and the menstruation phase is when you get your period. So when you're in those phases, it's recommended to kind of rein in the training a little bit because of the hormonal fluctuations, because of the massive drop in both testosterone and estrogen. It is advised, subject to unique and individual experiences and differences, to kind of not be striving to hit your personal best then, because realistically, mentally, emotionally, you're not feeling all that great. Physically, it's pretty much a given that you're not going to be feeling optimal, no matter who you are, unique individual, lifestyle. From a hormonal profile standpoint, if you have a healthy period, if you have a healthy menstrual cycle, even then, it's likely that you won't be in a position to be going crazy, hitting PBs left, right, and center in strength training. And I think that's so important to know, because I didn't know that. And that annoys me. And had I known that, I wouldn't have been so hard on myself in previous years when I haven't been able to show up every single day, train like a boss every single day, because I'm different to a man for so many reasons, which we won't get into today. But one being our hormonal profile, okay? And we have to show ourselves compassion, because what we go through every freaking month is hard. It's hard, okay? And not to play the victim, because we don't do that here. We're not about playing the victim. But showing ourselves self-compassion for that is so important, because what happens is if we ignore that and we suppress that and we're like, suck it up, let's just go to the gym, let's train like a boss, in and out every single day, let's go. We're going to lead, firstly, to frustrations with ourselves, like mentally, emotionally. We're going to be like in the gym and we're like, why can't I lift the same weight today? Like, it feels so much heavier. Like, I'm so stupid, I'm so weak. And this is when the negative self-berating thoughts start to seep in, okay? Because you're more susceptible to feeling negative and low when you're in these phases of your cycle anyway. So it's really important to, when you need to, rein in the training a little bit. So if your period, say, starts on a Monday and the days leading up to it, you were feeling pretty crap, take those days to do yin yoga, short walks, long walks, just low intensity, whatever it is, things that make your body feel good. You can get the body moving. It's about listening to your body, tuning into what it needs on any given day. And then you can backload the week with your resistance sessions when you enter maybe your follicular phase of your training, and you're more likely to feel strong and you're more likely to hit PBs. So it's all about cycling your training to fit you. And this is what I say to my clients is, don't feel shame or guilt for not feeling up to training, especially when it correlates with, say, a low period mentally or physically because of your menstrual cycle. Lean into that, let your body rest, and try enjoy that, try enjoy getting creative with how you move your body that day and moving your body in a way that makes you feel good. Because at the end of the day, we can have all these physique goals, but if we're not happy and loving towards our body in the process of it, what's the freaking point? Like, this body is your temple, as cliche as that sounds, and it's here to serve you as much as you are to serve it. So like we need to work with it as opposed to try to work against it and, you know, be go, go, go all the time, like achieve, achieve, achieve. Like there are days in our time of the month where we're actually just meant to lean into that stillness, calmness, and reconnect with our bodies. Like it's pretty cool time to actually just kind of try to tune into your body, figure out what it needs in that moment in time. And from that point onwards, you'll be in a far better position mentally and emotionally as well as physically, like I said, in your follicular phase, for example, or your ovulation phase, to be able to perform better in the gym. So that's the bust part of that, is that men and women are not the same. Myth bust number 3. The more the better, right? Once again, this is a little bit more complex than a simple bust or back. So firstly, I'm going to partially bust this one because more is not always necessarily better when it comes to training frequency, training volume, training intensity throughout the week, okay? The importance of rest and recovery cannot be understated here. Rest days are growth days. So on the days that we're training, as I said before, this is when the microscopic tears are created. But the rest days and sleeping well and eating well, this is when our fibroblast cells come in to repair the muscle tissue and help it grow. So a lot of clients come to me initially being like, I want to go all in, 0 to 100, like no sessions to 5 or 6 sessions a week. And I'm like, no, that's just not happening, because I don't even train that much anyway, because I'd be overtraining if I did based on my split. But also there's no benefit to training at that frequency, putting aside the all or nothing mindset part of that dilemma to begin with. There's no benefit, only detriment from training to that intensity, that frequency, and that much volume. So that's the bust. The back part of this myth would be, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And this is what I actually personally went through up until last year. I didn't realize it, but I wasn't actually pushing myself to the intensity required. I thought I was. Part of the issue was also not eating to support my training, but that aside, I wasn't really pushing myself to progressively overload week on week. I was kind of just going through the motions, getting my sessions in, wasn't tracking my program, wasn't logging my weights, wasn't logging my reps, wasn't seeing how week on week I was progressing, and that's progressive overload. Without that, you're not going to be growing. So if nothing changes, nothing changes. And like I said in the earlier myth, is that if you're not new to training anymore, your body, your muscle has been exposed to that stimuli before, it's harder for you to build muscle anyway, but even more so if you're not challenging it to grow. Like I said before, your muscle adapts. So when you get used to, say, like 80 kg leg press, and you perform that for 12 reps, say, and you keep doing that week on week, obviously nothing's going to change. So because your muscle gets used to that particular stimulus, it no longer finds it hard, so therefore the microscopic tears no longer occur. This is called the repeated bout effect. So this is essentially the epitome: if nothing changes, our muscles adapt. So it is really important in order to avoid plateaus and to actually see gains, albeit they smaller and more incremental the further along in your muscle building journey that you are on. It is still important that you need to constantly, week on week, be leveling up, be that through increased reps, increased load, slow down your tempo, improving your form, increasing your range of motion. Like, there's so many variables that we can manipulate every week to get the results we want. But if we're not at least pulling the strings of one or the other, or at least at the very minimum one of those variables, then we're not going to be seeing to any change. So that's the back part of that, is that the more, the better from a change standpoint, okay? You need to be able to progress week on week and be looking and striving to level up your training in some shape or form. Otherwise, nothing changes without change. So I actually will have a weekly newsletter out on this one. So if you haven't subscribed to that already, it's in my bio, in my Instagram at Mauve Coaching, to sign up, because I'll be going far more into depth than I can do here, purely because of time constraints. So go check that out, subscribe, And if you subscribe a little bit later to when I've released that newsletter, send me a DM and I will resend that newsletter to you. And the final myth bust that we actually have time for here, so we're going to do 4 myth busts today, is a lot of people come to me with this, I guess, mindset that they're unable to either lose or gain weight, so muscle and body fat. And they say that like as a matter of fact. They're like, no, like I simply cannot do it. And a lot of the time, genetics is being blamed for that. And like I've spoken about before, yes, genetics play a role, say, for example, in the size and the shape naturally of your glutes. Like you can be genetically blessed from the get-go and that, but we can't let genetics be a scapegoat for our lack of discipline, our lack of persistence, our lack of adequate nutrition, good sleep, all these variables in our lifestyle that we are in control of, that a lot of the time we just let slide. Like we can't let genetics, which is only a part of the puzzle, be the reason that we just throw in the towel and accept this as our reality, okay? Because if I did that, I wouldn't have any muscle on me right now. Like I am naturally a very lean, straight and narrow lady. And now I am a little bit curvilicious. And that is because of years and years of training and recently especially really working on my nutrition. So let's just go back to that glute growth, for example, because a lot of girls come to me with that goal because of my personal journey and my personal initial struggle with this. And like I said before, they just think that because their genetics are flatter bum than the likes of the girls who are just a little bit genetically blessed in that area, they don't necessarily even train a lot of the time and they just have a big booty. And hats off to you, like I'm jealous, but I have naturally popping quads. We always want what we can't have, grass is always greener, but we can always work to get the physique changes that we want to have, okay? All while working on improving body acceptance and body image, really important to do that at the same time. But that's not to say that you aren't perfectly entitled to want to have a fat ass, okay? I do, so why can't you? However, we can look to genetics and be like, oh, I'm just never going to have a big bum, accept that as my reality. I'm not going to say that I have the world's largest ass because I do not. I don't necessarily want that either. I just always wanted to have a little bit more shape to me in the derriere. And I did achieve that. It wasn't without hard work and persistence, not to say it's easy. But people just assume that genetics is the only way essentially to grow a bum because it takes time to build muscle, like I said before. And a lot of the time people give up when they don't see overnight their bum tripling in size from doing 3 sets of hip thrusts. Like obviously that's not going to happen. So discipline and patience and consistency is super important there. But also know that if you are listening right now and you think, that's me, I'm not able to build a bum. Yes, you are. You are able to build up to 90 to 95% of the size of the average woman's derriere if you have the right training and nutrition program, okay? Genetics counts for 5 to 10% of that, which is literally nothing. So let's leave that excuse in the fucking bin. Nah, goodbye. Genetics, okay, we're leaving that out. That's not a factor it's not even a factor in our control, so why would we even take that into account? But I guess a part of that equation is you have to get comfortable with gaining a little bit of extra body fat, okay? Because part of that increase in size will be both through muscle and body fat. But these are all things that we can chat through. If this is something that you want to do, give me a message and I can help you on your journey to grow a fat ass. And then finally, from losing weight standpoint, sometimes hormonal issues that are underlying and that you're not necessarily aware of are playing a significant role in your struggle or your perceived inability to lose weight. So my advice to you in that instance would be get your bloods checked, get scans done, figure out if you have underlying health conditions such as PCOS, because this actually really helped one of my clients who was really struggling to lose the weight. Like she was honestly showing up week on week on week, and she was honestly and is still one of the most disciplined clients I have. And it was breaking my heart for her to see that she wasn't achieving the fat loss that she wanted, despite eating well, despite adhering to the nutrition plan, adhering to the training plan, doing all the things, like having all her ducks in a row and wondering, why the hell is this not happening for me? And a couple of things that she was saying to me when we were looking at, like, say, her menstrual cycle and her digestion and her gut health and like her, you know, history taking antibiotics and all these different things, like her eating patterns, like the types of food she was consuming. And like I've spoken about before, there's a massive interplay between gut health and the menstrual cycle, like our hormonal profiles. Things like that were coming up week on week in our check-ins. I was noting to myself these symptoms and they were screaming PCOS. And I didn't want to come to that conclusion too quickly. I didn't want to assume when I was seeing that there was these increasing list of indicators that she potentially had PCOS. I referred her to go get a test done on her ovaries and to go see a gynecologist. And alas, she got diagnosed PCOS. So if you are struggling to lose weight, I would say obviously first things first, get help with a nutrition and training program like myself. I can help you with that. But also don't be afraid of getting medical tests done, because if you have been trying for a long time to level up your training, your nutrition, your sleep, your lifestyle, everything, and still after like a long enough period of time, nothing's changing and you've been getting help with a coach, say, and you're still not seeing any results, this is when we have to start looking at potential underlying health conditions. So it's so liberating as well, from at least her experience. She said to me was that once she found out that that was one of the largest, at least, inhibitors of her losing that body fat that she wanted to lose, she was far more compassionate to her body and herself as a result, and her body image has improved ever since. So that would be my advice to you, is if you are struggling to lose weight and you've, as I said, had all the ducks in the row for a long time now, been getting help, and you're still not seeing that change, do go and get yourself checked. That is all for today's podcast, everybody. I did want to do one more myth bust. However, we will leave that to another future training Q&A style podcast. Never fear, I'll answer all your questions again, and who knows, it might be another myth busting format, because I honestly really did enjoy busting or backing all these myths. But I hope you enjoyed, and as always, if you like this episode, please do support the podcast and follow, like, share, you know the drill. Thanks so much for listening, guys. Bye.